Former President Donald Trump is facing what many in Washington and Sacramento describe as a rude awakening as the state of California appears to be preparing new measures aimed squarely at curbing his influence and undermining key elements of his political strategy. With tensions between the federal level and state governments escalating, California officials are stepping up efforts that could seriously complicate Trump's agenda and ambitions. At the heart of the confrontation lies the deepening divide between the Trump camp and California's Democratic leadership, which has grown increasingly bold in challenging what they view as federal overreach and authoritarian impulses. In recent months, California has moved aggressively to push back against Trump's claims of electoral rigging and misuse of federal power. State officials rejected the former president's assertion that a recent redistricting vote, Proposition 50, was a sham and that mail-in ballots in the state were rife with fraud. According to reporting, more than 7 million voters in California had already cast ballots, including more than 4.6 million by mail, yet no credible evidence of widespread fraud has surfaced. California's Secretary of State labeled the referendum process valid and faulted the rhetoric for undermining public faith in democracy. Meanwhile, Governor Gavin Newsom dismissed Trump's remarks on X, formerly Twitter, as the rants of a man heading toward defeat. State officials say California is not about to be intimidated. The redistricting measure at issue is seen as a preemptive move by Democrats to blunt potential gerrymandering efforts after the 2026 elections. Trump and his allies had urged Republicans in other states to redraw maps to shore up their narrow House majority, and California's leadership argues that Proposition 50 represents a defensive strategy rather than a partisan gamble. One California official called Trump's claims of fraud another baseless attempt to erode vote confidence. But that is only part of what state leaders call Phase 1. In parallel, the state is also ramping up litigation and oversight efforts targeting federal actions. Earlier this year, California filed a lawsuit accusing the Trump administration of unlawfully federalizing the California National Guard and deploying thousands of troops to Los Angeles in response to protest activity and immigration enforcement efforts. The filing argued that the action bypassed the governor's authority and violated the 10th Amendment, asserting that there was no rebellion and no civil insurrection justifying Title X deployment. This, the lawsuit states, was an unprecedented overreach. The state's move prompted a sharp escalation in rhetoric. In June, Los Angeles-based federal forces were sent amid protests sparked by immigration raids and other enforcement sweeps. Trump described Los Angeles as a trash heap and promised to liberate the city from criminal elements, while an acting federal official said the cost of the deployment would be about $134 million. California officials, meanwhile, said the deployment was a manufactured crisis, designed to inflame tensions and create a pretext for federal power grabs. With the state suing the federal government and Governor Newsom publicly likening Trump's behavior to that of failed dictators, the dynamic has shifted from simple political rivalry to constitutional conflict. The lawsuit seeks a restraining order to stop further federal troop deployments in California and restore control to the state. Legal experts say the case may set important precedents for the limits of presidential authority, particularly if Trump returns to the White House or exerts significant influence over federal policy. At the same time, California is leveraging its economic and regulatory clout to push back against Trump-style agendas in places like environmental regulation, immigration policy and labor rights. Trump has long railed against California's environmental protections, sanctuary policies and regulatory regime, citing them as evidence of the state's dysfunction and as a blueprint for federal rollback. In turn, California has responded with new legislation and special sessions of the legislature aimed at shoring up state autonomy, protecting immigrant rights and insulating the economy against federal interventions. Political analysts say Trump is now encountering a state that is unapologetically prepared to fight him on multiple fronts rather than defer to a national agenda built around his worldview. One expert said that California has grown comfortable with constructing institutional firewalls, legal, financial and regulatory, that blunt federal initiatives that do not align with its priorities. California's size, budget, and political orientation give it a special status in internal U.S. politics, and state leaders are increasingly treating their relationship with federal power as one of strategic defense rather than cooperation. In essence, a surprise California is unveiling may not be a single bombshell policy, but a comprehensive shifting of leverage. It is signaling to Trump and his allies that they cannot assume California will simply comply or serve as a testing ground for conservative federal policies. From redistricting to troop deployment to voting rights oversight, the state is actively preparing to resist. Trump's rhetorical framing has often been that of confrontation. He warns of inner-city lawlessness, immigration threats and corrupt voting systems. He has targeted California as a symbol of decay and chaos, needing a strong federal intervention. But state officials argue that the opposite is true. It is the federal interventions themselves that are destabilizing and self-serving. The new California strategy sees Trump's narratives of crisis as opportunities to assert state sovereignty and to mobilize public and legal opposition. There are risks and trade-offs in this approach. California's aggressive posture means it may further polarize national politics and invite retaliation from federal actors or Trump-allied states. The legal battles will be long and expensive. California may expend political capital in ways that expose internal divisions. Furthermore, Trump's national base still holds sway in many parts of the country, and if he regains power, his ability to mobilize federal resources or shape law enforcement policy may overshadow state blocs. Skeptics caution that while California can win media attention and establish legal markers, the underlying structural balance of federal versus state power remains uncertain. Yet for the moment the momentum appears to be with California. The state is executing a multi-pronged campaign, securing legal venues, marshalling public opinion, enhancing institutional capacity and drawing alliances with local governments and advocacy groups. The goal: to create what some officials call a resistance infrastructure, not resistance in a protest sense, but a governance readiness system that anticipates and neutralizes federal initiatives perceived to threaten the state's values. Whether one agrees with this framing or sees it as partisan defense, the scale and ambition of California's posture is hard to ignore. Trump, meanwhile, appears to be blindsided in some respects. His attacks on mail-in ballots and redistricting maps in California have been met with firm rebuttals and legal handcuffs. His deployment of troops and military-style displays in California have drawn lawsuits and condemnations. His overarching message of federal dominance is facing a counter-message of state sovereignty and distributed power. Political commentators say this may well be Trump's rude awakening, the realization that California is not just another state to be governed or shaped, it is a bold political actor in its own right. The implications extend beyond state-level politics. If California succeeds in its strategy, it may embolden other states to adopt similar defensive postures. The federal system itself may evolve into a stage of tensions rather than coordination. For Trump, the message is clear. Pushing hard on federal authority, law and order agendas, and narratives of chaos will not necessarily yield smooth victories, especially in large states whose leadership is prepared to fight back on multiple fronts. What happens next remains uncertain. Legal battles over troop deployment and state-federal authority could drag on for years. The outcome of California's redistricting vote and its subsequent electoral maps may reshape House races and Senate margins. Public opinion in California, historically leaning Democratic, may become even more consolidated behind state-led resistance to Trump's agenda. Meanwhile, Trump's ability to rally a national base will face tests if state-level institutions start foreclosing policy pathways or blocking jurisdictional routes. In the short term, the clash is likely to produce heated media cycles, legal filings, campaigning around state ballot initiatives and possibly even new legislation designed to insulate California from future federal interventions. California may also increase its collaborations with local governments, nonprofits, and private sector actors to build networks that operate semi-independently of federal oversight. These kinds of preparations would represent a significant shift in how state governments respond to national leadership. From the perspective of California officials, the surprise is not just that they are fighting Trump, it is that they are doing so from a position of strength. The state's economic scale, tag space, regulatory influence and global brand give it unique leverage. That leverage is now being converted into institutional readiness rather than passive resilience. For Trump, who often thrives on disruption and federal spectacle, facing a disciplined opponent with long-term strategy may prove more challenging than previous confrontations. The wider political significance is that the era of unilateral federal action may face increasing obstacles. The more states like California build defenses, the more the field of policy and politics becomes contested terrain rather than top-down governance. If the trend continues, it could lead to a more fragmented political ecosystem in the United States, with states acting almost like independent players in relation to dominant federal blocs. For Trump, this environment represents a much more complex landscape than his core narratives suggest. In critical ways, this is not simply a story of one man versus one state. It reflects deeper fault lines in American governance, The balance of powers, the role of states as laboratories of democracy, the tensions between federal confidence and local autonomy, and the diverging visions of national identity. Trump's mode of leadership emphasizes centralized control, unilateral decision-making and spectacle. California's emerging mode emphasizes distributed power, legal counterweights and institutional readiness. The collision of these approaches is likely to shape not only the coming election cycle but institutional politics for years to come. In the end, the phrase "rude awakening" seems apt. Trump may have entered this phase assuming California would yield or serve as a backdrop to his national star line. Instead, he finds a state mobilized, strategic and unapologetically adversarial. For California, the moment is about reputation, autonomy and governance rather than partisan scoring. As the battle unfolds, the question is whether Trump adapts to the new reality or doubles down in a landscape that is increasingly resistant to his methods. The likely answer will help determine not just policy direction but the future of federal-state relations in America.